Hi, this is Deborah from Embody Nature, and welcome if it's your first time. So great to have you here today. And for those of you returning, you know the deal. Drop in some love, some highs, tell me what's going on for you today. And it's so great to have you here and to keep these conversations going. So I am a trauma and emotional regulation coach, and I really sit in understanding what are the patterns that sit sort of below the surface for us and really work on changing those so that we can live the lives that we want to live and stop being ruled by our emotions. So, I guess where I was looking today is really looking at, I came yesterday, I had a morning where I woke up feeling really anxious. Fortunately, I managed to work through stuff fairly quickly, so I didn't sit in it all day. But it really made me think, and I've talked to a few other people lately, it's something we don't often talk about, just this feeling. And sometimes, women in midlife, we get this anxiety just because it's a fun game that, another thing for us to have a symptom. And sometimes it's this feeling of waking up and going, not just feeling a bit off, but feeling like something really bad has happened and I'm responsible for it. So it started making me think about how, for me, anxiety is really strongly linked to shame for me. And this shame sits under the surface really deeply. There's this sense of, as a child, the things that happened to me, if anyone really knew, they wouldn't, they'd judge me. They'd feel like, and I'd get this feeling like I'm not good enough. So this kind of feeling of shame, this feeling like I'm a bad person, because of what's happened to me, really ruled everything in my life. It really, impacted on my relationships, because in all my relationships, I'd be so worried that people would pull away from me and disconnect or not see that I was good enough, that I would sort of overfunction and overperform and, be the one doing all the thinking and the doing and, trying to bring people closer to me, being the one that organized everything. And then what was happening is these actual actions and that my behavior was really repelling the people that I wanted to draw close. And so this kind of meant, I was actually disconnecting from the very people that I wanted to connect with, which then, of course, triggered my abandonment wound. Yay for that. And so when this gets triggered, I tend to then disconnect and push people away. So I will leave them before I get hurt. And this, just creates a whole lot of anxiety again. So you can see there's this big loop going on, and you can get really caught up in what is happening. And I guess yesterday, I sort of woke up feeling really in my head. I was working through some attachment issues and things that have been brought up for me in relationships. I was thinking about how I was being perceived by others, instead of feeling grounded in who I am. And when this happens, it's like we hand over our power to everything outside of us. And instead of thinking I'm good enough all on my own, I'm connected to, myself, I start going off on this, cycle in my head. So there's this underlining sort of anxious energy that sort of kicks into gear. Nothing feels clear or certain anymore, where, the core things I lay my hat on is, a sense of certainty and clarity in the things that I do. So I guess instead of spiraling, because of the work that I do in this space, I really recognized it really early, because I knew that this wasn't random. This was actually information. So my anxiety, instead of treating it like the enemy, I'm treating it these days like it is information. So, so just being able to recognize that this was my shame talking, and this childhood of, not being good enough. And I guess what it led me to was just really looking at what had happened in my week, because I had ended up running a couple of days workshop, ironically, around trauma and emotional regulation. But I'd actually had 3 days where I was out of my comfort zone, because it's new stuff I'm teaching in this space that I was teaching it in. It's somebody else's tools and models, so I wasn't just talking about the stuff that I know. And I was getting thrown in the deep end, and trying to co-facilitate with somebody who has been, in the space for a long time. And I just felt like I was spending so much time, wondering, am I good enough? Feeling like I wasn't really in my power, not sitting in this amazing space where I feel like I know my stuff, I know my audience, I know this is, what I need. So what I sort of did is realize I just stopped yesterday morning when I was starting to feel myself spiraling. And I reflected, and I was just really gentle on myself. I took myself for a really gentle walk instead of going out running, because I actually needed to sit and process all these feelings from pretty much days of being on the run and completely neglecting all my needs. Like, I hadn't been meditating like I regularly do 2 or 3 times a day. I do a couple of like little 10-minute sessions. I'd been sitting way out of my comfort zone. I had been rushing from one thing to the next. So I went straight from, 8 hours of training into going out in the evening. I had a glass of wine. I just really hadn't got myself the time and space to reflect and process all these feelings. So it kind of came to a head yesterday morning, and I really felt like something needed to shift. And sometimes when this happens, people go into fix-it mode. We try to push through, thinking it was Thursday morning or Friday morning, I just have to get through to the weekend. I could have just pushed through. I could have tried to be more productive, more positive, but that's not what creates real change. What I've learned both personally and through the work that I do is you have to get the inside right first. And sometimes that means sitting in really uncomfortable feelings, because underneath that anxiety, there's always something deeper. And for me, it was that old pattern of that disconnection, of not quite being anchored. So I was disconnecting from myself and then trying to kind of, disconnect from others around me. So the story that my mind was telling me didn't actually match what was happening. And I could really recognize this when it was happening. The evidence that I had wasn't matching up with my reactions and how I was seeing things. So what I realized, it was actually my old nervous system in play. It was trying to look at those old pathways that haven't quite disappeared. They're still there in the background, and they were trying to operate, but they were operating in a life that no longer fits that pattern anymore. And this is the shift. When you can see it, when you can name it, you don't get lost in it anymore. So instead of trying to fix how I felt, I came back to what I know works. I regulated first. I slowed down, I paused, and I let my body settle. Then I moved and I got into nature. I actually pulled out my phone and just did some recordings of like what I was thinking, which really helped me just almost talk out loud. So it helped me get out of my head. I got into my body through just moving in nature. And from there, I gently found my way back into clarity. And my thoughts started making sense again and starting to line up. It wasn't forced, it wasn't rushed, but I just, could support myself in that moment. And I guess this is what I want you to really take in. So you're not meant to feel on all the time. You're meant to know how to get back to yourself. Because the difference I see again and again is people get stuck in these moments and they start questioning everything in their lives, and they don't quite know how to return to their power. And sometimes people haven't ever sat in their power. And I guess this is the work I love doing in my therapeutic space, is really able to help clear some of the blocks in the pathways, in these patterns, helping identify the patterns and what is the core of this. Because for me, it wasn't really the things that I thought were going on. It was my patterns from back in my childhood. And as soon as I could identify that that was actually my shame and my not feeling good enough, then I realized it was my old system activated, not my, not who I am today and not how I show up in the world. And I guess for me, that was really like liberating. I could free myself knowing that, I've got a different operating system in place these days. So what I do, you know, for the clients I work with is actually support them to understand what's going on in their system, and try to untangle and, you know, understand those old patterns and build that way back to that calm and connection that actually works in real life. So I guess if you're sitting there thinking, I know this feeling, and I'm tired of going in circles with it, because some of the people I know that are sitting with anxiety at the moment, it is really debilitating. I know anxiety can really get to the point where it's stopping people from, you know, living the life, not just living the life that they really want to live, but it's actually making it hard for them to really function in the world. So it can be, you know, anxiety can vary from something. For me, it's just something that gets in the way every now and then, but for other people, it can be this ongoing, continuous cycle that's going on. But what I want you to know is that cycle can be broken. And I guess we can teach a new pattern, but actually go back to what is the source? Where is this anxiety actually coming from? What is the cause? And when we get back to that point, everything seems to make sense. And I can see it in my clients, those aha moments where they're like, oh, this anxiety, and sometimes it's not even about them, it's about stuff that's happened in past generations that has created, you know, stress in their parents. And in our first few years of life, we actually can adopt the nervous systems of our parents. And sometimes we never get to that point where we develop our own new nervous systems. It should happen as we're heading into those kind of, you know, late primary school, early teen years. We should start developing our own nervous system, and it should be, you know, our turn to say, this is how we want things to be. These are the patterns we want to keep, and these are the ones we want to get rid of. But for some people, they don't make that transition. So some of the work I do is helping people go back so that we can kind of sit well in the beginning and then actually change. It's almost like rewriting the scripts. And the relief my clients feel when they find that core wound and that source of what's going on for them, it can make so much difference. Like I know one client who I worked with, you know, his core wound was meaning, you know, he was struggling with business decisions, and within a couple of months now, you know, the clarity he has in his business, the decisions he's making, and the, you know, the money that's lining up with that, and the opportunities and the contracts that are coming his way, that he can now discern really quickly, you know, yes, no, yes, no. And I've also had other clients who are just liberated from being able to break these patterns and know, you know, this is where the source was. And now from here onwards, everything feels better. You know, the anger doesn't feel so strong. The sadness doesn't feel so deep. The fear isn't debilitating. So we can change all these things. That fear, guilt, shame, that is the work that I do. So, you know, reach out if this sounds like you and you were really looking for something to change. I am so proud of this work that I'm doing, and I know that it can happen a lot quicker than you think. And often with clients, within 2 or 3 sessions, things are really changing in their worlds, and they continue to change afterwards. So reach out, send me a message, DM me, and, you know, I'd just love to, you know, have you stop going around and around in those circles. So invest in yourself, your time, your energy. One of my beautiful clients has insisted that I say, don't wait too long. She has waited and waited and waited to work on this stuff, and she is so glad that she's doing this now, and just can't insist enough that you jump on board. So if you're sitting on the fence and this sounds like something you'd love, yeah, get in touch, because we can do some work real quick and really, you know, change things for you. So hi Gary, hi Sasha, so nice to see you guys here. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say today. But yeah, have a great day, and know that things can change for you, and it can sometimes happen in an instant. So have a great day. We'll see you soon. Bye.